Hello everyone, good evening. So we are taking ahead our series of thinking themes. Alright, and today's subject obviously will be international relations. So we will look into various themes of international relations on which UPSC in a way has a habit of asking questions. What we'll also do is we'll take into consideration the PYQs from those particular themes and we'll try to analyze, we'll try to establish what should be your line of thinking and what basically you have to include in your answers or more or less has to be the content of your answers. ठीक है? So इससे what will happen is you will be able to micro focus on the areas that are needed for mains 2025. All right, students who are writing in 26 can also get benefited out of it, but mainly what we will do is we will try to make job of those writing mains this year a bit easier. All right, chalo, let us start then with international relations and the themes. First and foremost, let us focus upon what is international relations. देखो, ये बताने की जरूरत तो वैसे नहीं है. I don't need to define it or I don't need to explain it in detail. But what happens is, or what has happened is, कि the crux of a subject is not understood by many students, and therefore overall preparation of that particular subject gets damaged. ठीक है? मतलब if the central theme or the central line of inquiry of a particular subject is not known by you, you will not be able to score marks in that subject even if you go through many books or even if you keep on going through content after content, नहीं होगा. So what basically is international relations? As far as GS paper 2 is concerned, international relations, according to me, and it is not according to me, it is after we at GSScore, went through PYQs, what we have understood. What is international relations for GS paper 2? It is basically relation of convergence, of divergence, whatever it might be, relation between international entities. Now, when I say international entities, it includes nations, it includes groupings, it includes nations, it includes groupings, and it includes international organizations. ठीक है? तो it is basically relation between international entities, that is nations, groupings, and international organizations. That is what international relations is. From the point of view of GS2, it is how these relations concern India. इसके बाहर कुछ भी नहीं. All right, nothing outside how these relations concern India. ठीक है? If there is an attack by Ukraine, as it happened 2 or 3 days ago, ठीक है? If there is attack by Ukraine on Russia, it is a news. It is something that matters when it comes to international relations. But for me as a student of GS paper 2 now, I will focus upon what was that attack and how that attack has impacted India's standing or India's relation with either Ukraine or either Russia. That is what my primary concern will be. That basically what my primary concern will be when it comes to international relations from the point of view of GS paper 2. Now coming to what is the weightage of international relations in GS paper 2? So international relations in GS paper 2, now what does it do? It more or less carries 4 questions with it. All right, 2 10 markers and 2 15 markers. So total is of about 50 marks. So 250 marks में से what do we see is 250 marks में से what do we see is 50 marks are allocated to international relations, 50 marks are allocated to IR. In comparison to polity and governance, yes. In comparison to polity and governance, yes. Allocation of marks is less. But what we also see is getting maximum out of these 4 questions is relatively easy. All right. So conversion ratio with respect to allotment of marks to a subject and marks that you get out of the subject, now that is more in IR. That is basically more in IR. That does not mean you have to spend more time with IR and compromise polity and governance. Rather, you will have to spend less time in IR if you focus upon the themes that I am about to discuss now. So if I have to focus upon international relations with this particular agenda, relations between international entities with India as a primary concern, तो मैं क्या देखूंगा? What will I look into or what will I orient myself towards? I will orient myself towards current affairs at this point of time for those writing mains. ठीक है, IR के theory में जाने का there is no फायदा. I'll put it straightforwardly. There is no फायदा of going through the theory of IR. Focus upon current affairs of international relations and that will be more or less help you out. ठीक है. If I take into consideration the questions that are asked in IR, what do I notice? The questions are current affairs based. वैसे भी they are current affairs based. Yes, theory you need. Theory basically you need. But I will say don't now invest your time in going through theory again. Alright, theory will come back to you. Once you have gone through the current events in international relations, now what will happen is theory will start coming back to you and we will mentor you also in that. So don't worry at all. Don't basically worry at all. आप जब answers लिख के दोगे, whenever you present us with your answers, we will make sure or I will make sure कि where a theory was to be particularly used. That is not a problem, or where a particular episode from history was to be described. But focus on IR. Focus on current affairs. International relations is a subject that orients completely towards current affairs and that is why it is a bit easy to comprehend it. ठीक है, तो उसमें static और current का mixture as such we do not see. So that complication is lessened in IR. Other thing with respect to IR, if you ask me, is what has to be studied. देखो, broadly I have defined what is international relations for GS paper 2. Now what I will do is I will specify the areas, broad areas, and then we'll go into the themes. Themes are under the areas. ठीक है, I'll broadly describe the areas on which the questions are asked and also the mentality that you should have or the attitude that you should have to look at that particular area, so that you can first and foremost revise it with that attitude and then write the answers. ठीक है, so what are those areas? First is India and its neighborhood. So basically India and South Asia. Every year there will be one question, at least one question, mostly 10 marker. Mostly 10 marker. If you observe PYQs now, what do you notice? We notice that every year there is at least one question on India's relation with one of its neighbors from South Asia, and that question is asked for 10 marks. That question basically is asked for 10 marks. And when we look at basically that question now, what UPSC expects us to know? First and foremost, UPSC basically expects us to know the importance of that country to India. For example, last year they had asked on Maldives. Now they had asked us geostrategic importance and geo-economic importance of Maldives. All right. First and foremost, they expect us to know the importance of that country for India, and most of the times the question will be on that only. Second, what they expect us to know is helping hand that India might have been providing or was providing in recent past to that particular country. For example, when the question was asked on Sri Lanka, what was the question about? The question was about how India's help to Sri Lanka during the financial crisis has shaped the relation. That was the crux of the question. So helping hand, if India has been providing, or developmental aid, if India has been providing or was providing in recent past, now about that they will ask, and they will ask the implications of it on the relations between India and that country. ठीक है. Third, what has also evolved in recent times is connectivity. How India and a particular country in South Asia are connected to each other, and how this has led to economic development of India and economic development of that particular country. All right. How so collaboratively what we see with respect to South Asia is India's economic development with the other countries. Fourth, I will say an outlook that you should have when it basically comes to India and its neighbors. Now it would be about internal security problems. Now यहाँ पे ना there is interlinking of IR and IS, interlinking of international relations and internal security. All right. So यहाँ पे what we have to see, यहाँ पे what basically we have to see is how that particular country, for example Bangladesh, for example Pakistan, is in a way causing problem for India. What are those type of problems and how India basically should deal with those problems from the point of view of international relations. From the point of view of international relations. ठीक है, domestic turmoil in a particular country affecting India. For example, domestic turmoil in Bangladesh and how it has overall affected India. Now this can be one of the questions for 2025 mains. One of the questions for 2025 mains. Lastly, I will say the influence of China. China and the way in which it is dominating now. China, the way in which it is dominating and the relation that it has in a way developed with India's neighborhood. ठीक है, how that influence is navigating India's relation with a particular country in South Asia. That has to be focused upon. That also has to be focused upon. All right. So this is first major area, India and South Asia. India and South Asia. Second major area, I would say India and a region. अच्छा, यहाँ पे ना SAARC and BIMSTEC, India and South Asia में ना SAARC and BIMSTEC and their influence. ठीक है, on India's relations with sorry, I'm so sorry, and their relations with SAARC and BIMSTEC and their influence on the relation between India and the countries of South Asia, na, that also matters. So you have to keep that in mind also, and you have to study SAARC, BIMSTEC or any other influential organization, any other important organization. For example, SCO now has a big role to play or an important role to play in South Asia. So SCO कैसा regulate करता है या फिर SCO how it is affecting India's relations with these countries, na, South Asian countries, that also has to be looked into. So these are 4 or 5 things that you should keep an eye on when you are studying India and South Asia. ठीक है, then let us go to India and a major region. Major region. When we take into consideration India and a major region, na, first thing that you have to notice about this area is कि what are the favorite zones of UPSC. If you look into the past and if you analyze paper, what are important regions of the world on which UPSC wants you to focus so that you know how India fares with those regions. So what are those regions? First and foremost, extremely important is West Asia. It is extremely important, and it is extremely important of course, Mahendra, you can do that. In fact, you can send them to me over Telegram, and I will give you feedback on those particular questions. If you are also writing answers, if you are our students and if you are writing answers of some other test series, then even that you can send it to me. I will give my feedback on it. No problem with respect to it. We will always appreciate your hard work, your initiatives, and if you are taking one step to get into civil services, if you are taking one extra step, now I promise you GSScore will take 4 extra steps for you. Okay, we are always there for our students. All right. So what I was saying was India and major regions. So isme the most important region that I see to be focus of UPSC this year will be West Asia, because of so many happenings in West Asia and also because of India's interest in West Asia. Okay, because of India's interest in West Asia. Second, the one they had asked last year, Central Asia. Okay, Central Asia. Third, very important but not so favored by UPSC in terms of asking question is the Southeast Asian region, that is the ASEAN region. So these 3 regions are primary source of questions, I will say. Sabse zyada questions will appear from West Asia. Second, it will be Central Asia, and third, it will be my dear friends, it will be East Asia. Okay. Also Africa, but mostly these three regions. Africa pe ek aad question they have asked, but it does not mean that you have to you have to basically avoid Africa. Now, what type of information is needed by you when you focus upon these regions? What kind of information do you need to focus upon when you talk about this region? First and foremost, you need to know the resources that these regions provide us, and because of which these particular regions are important for us. Because of which these particular regions are important for us. For example, hydrocarbons from West Asia. Okay. Third is India's engagement with these regions strategically. India's engagements with this region strategically, that you need to know. Third, I will say, from the point of view of how this region influence India's positioning. How they influence India's positioning at global level. Okay. Then, if there are any infrastructural projects that will provide for connectivity between these regions and India, if there are certain infrastructural projects that will provide for connectivity between these regions and India. Uske baad, again, groupings. And how those groupings influence India's relations with a particular region, for example, I2U2. Question was directly asked on I2U2. So, I2U2 ka question basically was question on West Asia. Alright, it was basically a question on West Asia. So, organizations that influence India's positioning in a particular region, for example, again Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, against ASEAN. So, they have to be taken care of when you look into India and regions of the world. India and regions of the world. Uske baad mein, last I will say diaspora. Diaspora. So, India's diaspora in West Asia, or India's diaspora in East Asia, or India's diaspora in Africa. Central Asia mein, we do not have much diaspora, but diaspora in these three regions. And you have to, when a question is asked on diaspora, na, my dear friends, so you have to in particular know ki what India's diaspora does in that region. Okay, so India's diaspora, its work profile, its social profile is different in Africa, and it is different in West Asia, and it is different in East Asia. Okay. In fact, it is different in each of the countries, I will say, but utna detail mein UPSC will not. Okay. So you need to have an overview with respect to India's social and economic and social profiling of Indians. Economic and social profiling of Indians in a particular region of the world. And second thing is, you also need to have special focus on how diaspora of a particular country, Indian diaspora in a particular country, now how it influences relation of India with that particular country or that particular region. So the way in which American diaspora influences, Indian diaspora in America influences the relation between India and US. Now the same is not the way in which Indian diaspora in Kenya influences relation between India and Kenya. So what differentiating factor na, that you should basically know. Again, no need to get into the details of it. Regions mein na, dekho, there are 2 or 3 regions that are ignored by UPSC. Okay? But again, they will become important for you if they are in news. So which are those ignored regions? I will say Eastern Europe is an ignored region. I will say Latin America is an ignored region when it comes to UPSC, and third is Oceania, that is Australia and New Zealand. These 3 regions are ignored from the point of view of GS paper 2, और ऐसा कुछ खास हुआ नहीं है. ठीक है, nothing of substance or significance has happened in the last 1 year, I would say, or even in the last 2 years, कि they will become the base for questions this year. So you can this year avoid them. You can more or less this year avoid them. All right. Third, I will say, when it comes to areas that you should focus. Now, third, I will say is the focus that India has on major powers. Major powers. So every year there will be one-off questions on one of the major powers. On one of the major powers. So mainly the focus, usually I will say the focus is on US, UK. UK this year is important because of the trade deal. Focus is on UK. Third, focus is also on China. Focus is also on China and Russia. So these are four usual suspects. These basically are four usual suspects. These basically are four usual suspects when it comes to UPSC making a question on major powers. Okay. Now what has to be taken into consideration when you go through these major powers? What basically has to be taken into consideration? The first thing that has to be taken into consideration is benefits. What benefits India basically receives from them, and what are the drawbacks, or in what way India suffers when it comes to relations with this particular country. For example, with respect to US, we have many benefits. Okay, for example, US in a way is now our strategic partner. Okay, US is also the biggest source of investment into India if you take into consideration major countries. Other than that, if I take into consideration China, so with respect to China, what my focus will be, that China is one of our biggest trading partners. What also happens with respect to China is we have a border dispute. What also happens with respect to China is we suffer a trade deficit. We basically suffer a trade deficit. So benefits that we get from these countries and drawbacks that we have when it comes to, or demerits that we have when it comes to our relations with these countries, that will be the first focus. Second will be influence that these countries have on India's global positioning. On India's global positioning. Third, I will say influence that these countries have on India's relation with some other country. For example, influence that China has on relations between India and Pakistan, or influence that Russia has on relations between India and United States. All right. So that point of view has to be taken into consideration. Lastly, I will say major world organizations and how these countries influence, these world organizations to deal with India. Otherwise also, if you take into consideration so world organizations as such, and India's relations with those world organizations, for example IMF, for example World Bank, for example WTO, that are in questions, and you have to look at them from the point of view, of what benefits they give to India, and what basically with respect to those organizations influences India's positioning. वो तो करना ही है. But a particular country, how it influences our organization to work with India, that also has to be taken into consideration. Mahendra, with respect to American hegemony, with respect to World War या Cold War 2.0, ना देखो Cold War 2.0 has not been internalized. ठीक है, not been internalized in a general sense. Yes, this can be a question in PSIR, but it will not be a question in GS. It will not be a question in GS. I have already stated them, Mahendra. What kind of questions UPSC can ask in West Asia, I have already stated them. Okay. We will elaborate upon them when we get into particular themes. Don't worry, give me some time. We are getting there. We are basically getting them. Okay. Predicting nahi hota, Mahendra, please don't say predicting. What we can do is we can analyze. Okay. Predictions are not prediction basically is not the correct word when it comes to UPSC. हम लोग analyze कर सकते हैं what UPSC basically intends. ठीक है. Last but not the least, I will say one area that UPSC has started getting interested in, and on the basis of which now what I have seen is UPSC asks questions in the last 1 or 2 years is one of the tools. ठीक है, one of the tools of international relations. Now, what is a tool of international relation? A topic on which international community meets each other, a topic on which international community deliberates with each other. That basically is tool in IR. ठीक है, one of the tools with respect to IR has been climate diplomacy. Climate diplomacy is one of the tools through which countries interact with each other, through which countries deal with each other. And second is science and tech. Science and tech. Of course, you can also talk about terrorism or global commons. Okay. So these are basically tools, and we have to identify those tools, on the basis of which what we can do is we can predict, on the basis of which what we can do is we can in a way look at what UPSC expects from us. We can basically look at what UPSC basically expects from us. Tools may at this point of time, if you ask me, tools may at this point of time, the most important tool from UPSC point of view because of current affairs is science and tech. Especially space, to have a keen interest how space is playing out to be a tool in IR, how basically space is playing out to be a tool in IR. Any doubts, my dear friends? So please go ahead, you can ask me if there are any doubts. Gumakkad, what you have asked is, sir, how Bangladesh's changed attitude will affect India in the long run? It depends. It depends on what political affiliation does Bangladesh adopt from now on. Okay, if the current political outfit remains, then what will happen is pre-Sheikh Hasina wala relation between Bangladesh and India will be established, which will mean one more hostile neighbor. A neighbor which does not focus that much upon economic development, and hence what we see is India's internal security getting compromised. All right, India's internal security getting compromised. So if I take into consideration, what may happen in Bangladesh and what effect it will have on India-Bangladesh relations now. So it is based upon what political outfit gets into power in the next, say, 6 months. Okay. If the same political outfit remains in power, then there will be doubts on growth and sustenance of India-Bangladesh relations for a very long period of time. Not forever, but for a very long period of time. Okay, India will also lose a good trading partner. India will also lose an important neighbor which has, in a way, participated in enhancing India's internal security. When it comes to secessionist activities and all those things, Bangladesh in the last 15 years has supported India. Okay. So India in a way will lose a good partner, I will say. Also, it will provide grounds for China to expand its influence. Obviously, we will continue to have diplomatic engagements. with Bangladesh. But let us see how far basically those engagements go on and how basically, they are fruitful for India. You can diplomatically engage with someone positively only if that someone is a good recipient of it. You may have good intentions, you may basically have good intent of growing the relations. But if the mindset of the country with whom you are basically engaging, if that country does not have that mindset, or that country does not orient itself in that direction, that is of having good diplomatic relations, then your efforts will obviously not have so much of fruits. Your efforts will not provide you so much of fruits. All right, let us move ahead now. Now let us get into specific themes. So if I talk about India and Pakistan, the first theme I will say is India and Pakistan. All right, the first theme I will say is India and Pakistan and the relations between India and Pakistan. In this, major concern of UPSC, or what UPSC wants you to look into, is obviously first and foremost terrorist activities. I'm so sorry. First is terrorist activities and how terrorism propagating from POK or terrorism propagating from Pakistan is influencing the relation between India and Pakistan in adverse way. Okay, in adverse way. So special emphasis on that particular aspect, that is terrorism and its impact on India-Pakistan relation, how it has created mistrust, because of which growth of political, economical and cultural relations are stunted. Okay. Obviously, Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor will come into play. Current affairs will always come into play. If I talk about India and its neighbors now, there are two countries on which I strongly feel that question will be oriented, and that are, first is Pakistan because of Operation Sindoor, though directly Operation Sindoor, maybe they will not ask, maybe they will ask. Okay. If they ask directly on Operation Sindoor, the question will be on how it will influence India's responses to Pakistan or India's relations to Pakistan in future. How Operation Sindoor has influenced India's relation with Pakistan in future. Okay, that will be the question if directly question is asked. But the base of the question when it comes to Pakistan, it is terrorism, it is mistrust. It is terrorism, it is mistrust. And in the midst of these two, what lies ahead for relation between India and Pakistan? What lies ahead for the relation between India and Pakistan? Again, in 16 what they did was, they again focused on terror. In 16 they again focused on terror. One more thing with respect to India and Pakistan now. UPSC has this intent of showcasing or wanting you to know how India-Pakistan relations are influencing the regional growth or regional organization. Okay. How relations between India and Pakistan are creating problems for cooperation in regional organizations like SAARC or like Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Alright, that is what UPSC more or less has shown in the last few years. What has to be therefore studied when it comes to Pakistan? Dekho, overall Kashmir issue, most of you have read about it. Current status of Kashmir issue. Okay, especially how abrogation of Article 370 has affected relations between India and Pakistan, and at this point of time, again, as I had earlier told you, terrorism, that is Pahalgam. Okay, Pahalgam, how it has influenced the relations between India and Pakistan. Pahalgam also becomes important from the point of view of GS paper 3, that is internal security, border management ke point of view say it becomes important. Third point is of course Indus Water Treaty. Okay, Indus Water Treaty. India has stated that it no longer wants to continue with Indus Water Treaty. What basically will be the implications of it between India and Pakistan? What are the salient features of Indus Water Treaty, and what basically will be implications of it in the long run? This particular part, now UPSC had been in a way interested, that is soft power, that is cultural exchange, cricket diplomacy, media exchange. But this year, I do not think that UPSC will ask questions on it. Why? Because current affairs is not oriented in that direction. Yes, what you can do is, when it comes to relations between India and Pakistan, now agar way forward dena hai, then you can use this. Cultural diplomacy, cricket diplomacy, you can use those particular things. Depends upon the nature of the question, of course. Then SAARC, and why SAARC basically has not worked. Not only SAARC, it will ask question. UPSC basically has the intent of asking question with respect to other organization also, and SCO is an example of it. SCO, the question question that was asked in SU, more or less the orientation of it was India Pakistan ka dispute and how it is also in a way influencing the working of SCO. One more thing, one international organization that is working in South Asia but not exclusively in South Asia, and that is BIMSTEC. ठीक है, comparison might be drawn by UPSC between SAARC and BIMSTEC. All right, or what it may do is, what UPSC basically might do is it might want you to know why the working of BIMSTEC is at a rapid pace जो कभी SAARC के साथ हुआ नहीं है, something that has not happened with SAARC. So keep that in mind. SAARC देखना है, but BIMSTEC also has to be looked into, and the success of BIMSTEC also has to be looked into. Reasons for success of BIMSTEC have to be also looked into. And when it comes to reasons of success of BIMSTEC, now one of the most important pointer is Pakistan is not part of it. I am not saying कि Pakistan नहीं है तो बहुत अच्छा हुआ, because India and Pakistan in a way have a history of obstructing each other in international organizations. Pakistan not being the part of BIMSTEC, what it has allowed is, it has allowed free flow of work in BIMSTEC. ठीक है, that will be all when it comes to India-Pakistan relation. Specifically focus upon this part for 2025. Kashmir, terrorism, Indus Water Treaty. Also, I will add to it Simla Agreement, because Pakistan has stated that it will not affirm itself to Simla Agreement now. What basically were the salient features of it, and how does it influence the future relations between India and Pakistan? ठीक है, giving away of the Simla Agreement or not agreeing to the terms of Simla Agreement now, how it affects the relation between India and Pakistan in the future. Okay. Moving on to next theme, and that is India-China relations. India-China, there is this year a rare possibility of questions being asked. A rare possibility this year of questions being asked, because last 3-4 years were China heavy, more or less. They were basically China heavy. This year, not so much, I would say. This year, what may happen is, the question that you get, for example, India-Pakistan question that you will get, what you have to do is, you have to bring in China, not Jabardasti, but you may bring in China, the influence of China in India-Pakistan relation. That you may basically do. So, with respect to China, what are major areas that UPSC wants you to take into consideration? First and foremost is Indo-Pacific. In fact, I will say this is the most important area that UPSC wants you to look into, Indo-Pacific. How China's domination, how China's hegemony in Indo-Pacific is influencing India's presence in that region. All right, that has to be taken into consideration. So here है ना, देखो दो टाइप के क्वेश्चन बन सकते हैं. One is direct relation between India and China when it comes to Indo-Pacific. Second is from the point of view of a third entity. For example, India's relation with Vietnam. Now वहां पे आपको China लाना पड़ेगा. ठीक है, वहां पे आपको China लाना पड़ेगा, because the reason that India and Vietnam are growing so close is China. Or India and the members of Quad, or Quad as an organization. What is the binding factor there? It is China. Right, it is China. So Indo-Pacific है तो China है. Even if you are studying relation between India and any other country, ना फिर भी China है ही है. China is there. ठीक है. So China's position in Southeast Asia, especially Indo-Pacific, and how India is getting affected by it. How basically India is getting affected by it. Second, economic leverage of China on India and on India's neighborhood. ठीक है. Again, there will be rarely a question showcasing, मतलब that question I expect it to be in PSIR, कि economic leverage on India's neighboring countries, ना, how it is affecting India's relations with the countries of South Asia. This kind of questions I expect in PSIR. ठीक है. But as pointer, more or less as a pointer, ना, it can basically influence your answer to be better. ठीक है. For example, if you are writing An answer on India-Bangladesh relations. Obviously, you will mention how China at this point of time is active in Bangladesh and how it is negatively affecting India's relations with Bangladesh. But please remember, when it comes to China, never write that China's relation with a particular country, India is against it. Do not write it. We are not against any country's relations with any other country. So China's relation, if they are developing with Bangladesh, if China's relations are developing with Bangladesh, now we are for it. We are basically for it. Achhi baat hai, because in one of India's objectives or one of India's DPSPs is global peace. What we are against, that growing relation should not negatively impact India. So your answer should be in that direction. Kisi ka relation अच्छा hai, that is bad for us. Do not write that. UPSC will not appreciate. ठीक है? That relation is oriented towards demonizing India's influence or in a wrong way affecting India, na? There we will come into play, and there what we will do is we will play out our diplomacy. We'll play out our diplomacy. So this is with respect to China, more or less. This basically has been the crux of the questions that UPSC has asked with respect to China. Moving ahead, what has to be the focus? First and foremost, LAC issue, Doklam, Galwan. Now, when you talk about LAC, focus this year will be on de-escalation and how it has to be, how de-escalation has to be taken forward. Okay, de-escalation on the LAC between India and China, how it has to be taken forward. Evergreen question, Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific. Why Indo-Pacific is important for us? It is important for us for two reasons. First is trade, and second is arresting the hegemonic rise of China, because if China can act as an hegemon in Indo-Pacific and more specifically in Southeast Asia, it can act as an hegemon throughout the region, and that will limit India's scope of growth. That basically will limit India's scope of growth. Trade imbalance, tech dependency. Trade imbalance, India faces a large fiscal deficit with, trade deficit with China. India faces a large trade deficit with China. You have to know the reasons for it. You have to basically also focus upon what has to be done to do away with this trade deficit. For example, allowing more products to be in Chinese market, allowing more Indian products that India is known for to be in Chinese market. So you basically have to know those products. For example, pharmaceuticals. Okay, for example, pharmaceuticals, for example, IT services. Okay, so these are Indian products. If they are allowed into Chinese market without discrimination, or if there is better, if there are basically better trading lines, if there are better trading conditions, what will happen is the trade deficit, it will slowly and steadily, what will happen to this trade deficit is, it will slowly and steadily be reduced. Obviously, one other point is India diversifying its trade. For example, the products that we get from China, identical products are available to India from Southeast Asia. Okay, India orienting towards Southeast Asia. So these are the ways in which trade imbalance can be perfected or trade imbalance can be improved. From the point of view of China, again, Quad is important, but Quad is not important this year, I would say. Overall, जैसे तो Quad का importance होता ही है. Overall, Quad का importance है. Overall, you must know what is Quad, and overall, you must know what influences, what basically influences, what the things that influence India-China relations. Now, in that one of the regions, one of the things that I can now bring out is Quad. All right, it is Quad. तो क्वाड का एक जनरल इंपॉर्टेंस है, बट क्वाड स्पेसिफिक और स्पेशल इंपॉर्टेंस दिस ईयर डज नॉट सीम टू बी देयर, एंड हेंस I would say question might not directly come for Quad, or question might not be on Quad, but again, with respect to India-China relations and with respect to nature of the question, Quad can be used. Quad can be used as an example. All right. उसके बाद there is East Asia. Again, this year I do not see question on East Asia as such. And last is maritime counter strategy. There is a homework for you. There is one homework for you, and that is write down what is the strategy of necklace. ठीक है, write down this. लिख लेना ये and write in the comment section. ठीक है, moving on. China we are done. Sri Lanka, more or less the question in 2013 it was asked. It was a time when I was also writing my mains examination. So this question was asked when I was writing my mains examination, and it was with respect to the Tamil factor, how it influences Sri Lanka's foreign policy and how it influences India's foreign policy with Sri Lanka, how it basically influences the bilateral relations between India and Sri Lanka. In 22, specific question was asked on humanitarian and economic support during the crisis that India has basically provided to Sri Lanka, and how that humanitarian crisis has influenced relations between India and Sri Lanka. Now it is not only with respect to Sri Lanka, it is with respect to the other neighbors of India also. For example, India this year launched Mahasagar initiative. There is almost a chance of Mahasagar initiative being asked. Whenever there is a new initiative, now whenever there is announcement of a new initiative, now उस साल question on it is पक्का, ठीक है? तो Mahasagar initiative is something जिस पे I want you to focus this year. I want you to focus this year. And Mahasagar initiative is such that it will impact Sri Lanka also. It has been initiated in Maldives, but it will impact Sri Lanka also. ठीक है? So humanitarian and economic support, even humanitarian and economic support. Now, what specific humanitarian and economic support India has provided to Sri Lanka or any neighbor of its, and how it will influence India's relations with that country, now very important to be observed. It is therefore very important to be observed. Moving on to what has to be read in it. ठीक है, from this year's point of view not so important. ठीक है, from this year's point of view this theme is not so important. I don't think there will be a question on Sri Lanka, but the theme depends upon first and foremost Indian aid to Sri Lanka. Second is Tamil question. Second is basically Tamil question. And whenever you write about Sri Lanka, now please mention about the 13th amendment, which has not been implemented, but India consistently has asked for its implementation. 13th amendment of the Sri Lankan constitution. What it does is it provides equal rights to Sri Lankan Tamils, and it orients towards more decentralization. It orients towards more decentralization so that the provinces, all the provinces, but mainly those provinces with Tamilian population, they will basically get better powers within the framework of Sri Lankan federalism. Alright, the 13th amendment has to be written, and 13th amendment obviously has come in the backdrop of Rajiv Jayawardene agreement or accord. Rajiv Jayawardene accord, that also has to be mentioned. Strategic competition with China, देखो again, Sri Lanka can be used to provide as an example. Sri Lanka basically can be used to provide an example of China's growing influence in Indian Ocean region. ठीक है, अगर हमें साउथ एशिया की बात करनी है more specifically, तो Hamandota of Sri Lanka can be provided as an example. How basically we see China encircling us. ठीक है, string of pearls. उसका एक example is Hamandota. So you can use Sri Lanka as an example to showcase how India is intended to be encircled by China. ठीक है, that you can show as an example. Otherwise, Sri Lanka this year not so important. Moving on, India-Bangladesh relations. I feel there will be a question on India-Bangladesh relations this year. Shanbag protest and how it basically influenced India-Sri Lanka relations. Purani baat ho gayi. Let us move on from that. This year, the influence of question will be exile of Sheikh Hasina. It will be exile of Sheikh Hasina. Done. Okay. This all concerns will be taken into consideration. देखो, at one point of time when we used to study during my times or till last year also, when students studied India-Bangladesh relations, it was more from the point of view of cooperation in infrastructural development, cooperation in economic development. The times have changed so fast now. अब अगर पढ़ना है ना, read India-Bangladesh relations from the point of dispute. I will say read India-Bangladesh relations from the point of dispute. Strategy for countering China in Indo-Pacific. First and foremost, engage with the countries of Indo-Pacific in a positive way. Build, I will say, supply chain, build a supply chain system that is integrate your trade with the trade of those countries. At this point of time, when China speaks about India from the point of view of Indo-Pacific, especially from Southeast or South China Sea, China का सवाल होता है, what is your orientation in this area? आप यहाँ पे क्यों हो? That is the question that China is asking, and we basically have very limited answer to it, because our trade also with the countries of South China Sea is not such na. मतलब volume wise it is there, but it is not such कि India's engagement, India's large scale ship engagement can be justified. ठीक है, mercantile trade or mercantile trade in that area, or mercantile trade in that area that is of East Asia or Southeast Asia is not of such level कि India's major presence is expected or can be reasoned also. To engage with the countries of Southeast Asia more. Second, invest in the countries of Southeast Asia so that they are not dependent solely on China for their economic development. There are countries in Southeast Asia, for example, Vietnam. ठीक है, they want to orient away from China. If you look at their foreign policy, their orientation is not totally towards China, but they continue to engage with China. Reason being, China can provide them funds, China can provide them investments, China can provide them trading opportunities that India has still not provided. Complete your projects on time. That has been the complaint, that has been one of the most severe complaints against India. We take up projects and then we do not complete it, and then what happens is the country looks towards some other countries, and most of this time that some other country is China, which comes in and then completes the project. All right, which comes in and completes the project. And also have a multi-country approach towards South China Sea. ठीक है, multi-country approach towards Indo-Pacific. At this point of time, we do not have so much of resources as China to compete with China when it comes to investment, or even when it comes to trade, or when it comes to providing aid. ठीक है, we do not have that kind of resources, so we have to bring in other countries also. So try and collaborate as much as possible, as India is doing in case of Quad. As India is doing in case of Quad. Lastly, I will say focus on your positive areas. ठीक है, focus on positive areas that India can contribute. Focus on those areas where India can positively contribute. For example, I will say enhancing IT skills of a particular country. For example, developing a culture of entrepreneurship. For example, developing or orienting a particular country towards better financial inclusion. So these are India's strengths. These basically are India's strengths. For example, providing rural connectivity, which India has done very well in countries, for example, Sri Lanka. ठीक है, connect with the people directly of Southeast Asia, and that will in a way enhance India's position in the island countries of Indo-Pacific, or in the countries of Indo-Pacific in general, and that will be beneficial to India's foreign policy also, India's diplomacy also. All right, Mahendra. ठीक है. So this was about India and Bangladesh. Please take into consideration the dispute and how that dispute will impact India. That dispute will impact India not only from the point of view of India's positioning, but it will impact India's internal security also. It will impact India's economy also, because Bangladesh was India's biggest trading partner, or even today Bangladesh is India's biggest trading partner in South Asia. It is India's biggest trading partner in South Asia. All right. Obviously, it has to go with way forward. How will India improve its relation with Bangladesh? There has to be consistent diplomatic efforts from India. There has to be consistent reciprocation of it from Bangladesh. ठीक है, India has to communicate how minority targeting will only continue to degrade the relations. Minority targeting will only continue to degrade the relations. Also, what is important is India continues with its infrastructural projects in Bangladesh. Political ups and downs should not mean India limiting itself or withdrawing itself from infrastructural development projects. India has to continue and reach out when it comes to infrastructural development projects and try to build a goodwill from that, and try to basically build a goodwill from that. So that this basically are the points that India has to focus upon. These basically are the points that India basically has to focus upon when it comes to India and Bangladesh and the future of India and Bangladesh. Okay, India-Nepal, again, this year I do not see much scope of India-Nepal relations being asked. 2013 where the last question was asked, and that was asked from the point of view of Gujarat Doctrine. It was asked from the point of view of Gujarat Doctrine. If the question though, if it arises, then more or less it will be focused upon, hydrocarbon and trade dependency. ठीक है, sorry, hydropower, not hydrocarbon, hydropower and trade dependency. Apart from that, cooperation in infra development. Cooperation in infra development. Border dispute between India and Nepal, nothing in news as such. So, possibility of question being asked on it is very limited. Possibility of question basically asked on it is very limited. Japan's geostrategic buffer role, this year not important. Last year it was important because of Gelupu city. The city was being developed and India was expected to have economic growth because of it. There were positives through that Gelupu city for India, but this year Gelupu city is not in news. Bangladesh and Pakistan have overwhelmed the headlines. Therefore, there is little scope for either Nepal or Bangladesh. There is little chance of either Nepal or Bhutan to be appreciated by UPSC. This year there is very little chance for it. All right. India-Myanmar relations. India-Myanmar relations. Now, no question as such has been asked in that way with respect to India and Myanmar relations. So, this is basically a model question. All right. So, Myanmar in a way acts as a bridge between India and ASEAN countries, right? Myanmar basically acts as a bridge between India and ASEAN countries. So, question from that angle might be predominant, but again, very little chance of question of Myanmar being asked this year. If I have to take into consideration Myanmar, if I have to take into consideration Myanmar and relations between India and Myanmar, they will be first and foremost again based on India's infrastructural development projects. India's infrastructural development projects in Myanmar. And the influence that these projects have, on relations between India and Myanmar. Second, I will say, role in Act East policy. As I told you, Myanmar is a bridge between India and ASEAN. All right. So, if India wants to engage more with ASEAN, it can be done through Myanmar. If obviously it is done through the land route, it can be done through Myanmar. So, how those particular relations have to be developed? How those particular relations have to be developed? By keeping Myanmar in the centrality. That is one of the questions. Again, very little chance of it being asked. Lastly, post-coup diplomatic challenges. Myanmar is no longer a democracy. India and Myanmar in a way have not ended their diplomatic ties, but diplomatic ties at this point of time are not as pragmatic as they used to be. अगर क्वेश्चन आता है, because as I told you, IR is dependent upon current affairs. IR is dependent upon current affairs. Now, so if the question arises from Myanmar or with respect to relation between India and Myanmar, it will be on the basis of Rohingyas. ठीक है, it will be on the basis of Rohingyas and how the Rohingya issue is influencing India and Myanmar, rather how it is influencing India's relations with both Bangladesh and Myanmar. But again, there is very little chance of it being put into the question paper or it being asked. All right, regional architecture, SARC, SCO, Project Mausam, not that much this year, but yes, SARC and SCO and BIMSTEC. Add to this BIMSTEC. Okay. Look into the characteristic features of BIMSTEC. Look into what BIMSTEC intends to do. Look into what are the reasons for BIMSTEC being so pragmatic and accelerating when it comes to performance. And also look into some of the drawbacks of BIMSTEC. Okay. What will be the way forward? That's it. When it comes to BIMSTEC now, BIMSTEC becomes very important because few months ago, Prime Minister Modi stated that at this point of time, the most meaningful regional organization is BIMSTEC. Okay. Therefore, BIMSTEC becomes all the more important from the point of view of mains this year. Okay. India and its neighborhood, obviously, maritime security becomes important, and here again what we see is link between international relations and internal security. We again see a link between international relations and internal security. So role of IMO, strategic motors. ठीक है, यहाँ पे ना basically you have to bring in how India's international relations will secure India's maritime borders. And when I say how they will secure maritime borders, now it is not just against state actors, but it is also against non-state actors like pirates or like terrorist organizations. यहाँ पे important initiatives that India has taken up when it comes to maritime security or when it comes to maritime growth, like for example Sagar or Mahasagar. ठीक है, it will be taken into consideration or it will be written about. Also, the role played by IMO. Other than that, for this whole partner that we have just seen, please do not forget to go through what is Gujarat Doctrine and what is Neighborhood First Doctrine. Neighborhood First Doctrine. ठीक है. Okay. Now we come to the second area. I will say the second part that is of considerable importance. That basically is of considerable importance, and it is India and developed countries or developing countries. India and basically global powers. India and global powers. ठीक है. In 2019, basically the question was on strategic alignment, frictions in strategic alignment. देखो, when you look at India and US ना, things that you have to focus upon is convergence, where India and US have common, interests. But what you have to also take into consideration is divergence, especially when it comes to India's interest with Russia or India's relations with Russia and India's relation with Iran. All right, they have to be taken into consideration. Plus, what you have to also look upon is the dynamics between US-Pakistan relations. Now, this year, I would have otherwise not asked you to look into this particular area of foreign policy. Why? Because it is more oriented towards PSIR option. But this year, US-Pakistan dynamics are important. First and foremost, the way in which US conducted itself when it came to conflict between India and Pakistan in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor. And second is interest of US president personally in the Bitcoin market of Pakistan, or interest of US president himself in converting Pakistan into a Bitcoin heaven or crypto heaven. Okay, obviously that will basically influence relations between India and US, and that will also influence India's chances of positioning itself in South Asia as a platform for cryptocurrency, a platform for crypto trade. All right, so take that into consideration. 2020 mein question on India and US was asked, but it was asked in the backdrop of India-Russia relations. Okay, it was asked in the backdrop of India-Russia relations. Even this year, if the question is asked, it will be asked from the backdrop of India-Russia relations itself. Though this year, question being asked on India-US relations, it is quite rare. Chances are minimum. Chances basically are minimum. Okay. Major focus areas, obviously, when it comes to US, first focus area is defense, second is trade, and third is of course tech. But these two are the most important focus areas. Other than that, obviously there is Quad, and how Quad is influencing South Pacific, how is Quad influencing Indo-Pacific, and how is Quad influencing relation between India and US. Not only Quad, obviously I2U2 will also come into picture. Digital rules or AI. In fact, AI has become a new diplomatic tool. Okay, we'll talk about it, but more or less AI has become a diplomatic tool between India and other countries of the world. Okay, cooperation is necessary for the purpose of regulating AI. In the same way, having an upper hand in artificial intelligence in comparison to other countries also becomes important. It also basically becomes important. Okay, how India and US are playing role of stabilizer in Indo-Pacific and not allowing hegemonic rise of China, that has to be delivered, that has to be shown. Okay, obviously one of the reasons for it is neither India nor US at this point of time want to compete with China on themselves. Okay, not as if they cannot, but it is because China in a way has, through its policies, brought other countries closer. Now it makes more sense to collaborate, not for any destructive purpose as such, but protecting your own standing in international relations or on global platforms. Moving on, India-Russia. This year, India-Russia becomes very important. When it comes to major powers, now this year, Russia, I will say, is all the more important. Okay. Overall, the question has been on defense procurement. This year also, there might be an orientation towards defense procurement, especially S-400. I'm so sorry. And future of, question will not directly be on S-400, but S-400 will be used as example to ask a question on future of defense procurement or defense relations. Future of defense procurements or defense relations between India and Russia. Done. Other than that, what also can become the base of question is diversification. Diversification of India's defense good, is it worth it? Okay. Because if you take into consideration recent conflict with Pakistan, what we have seen is it is Russian based equipment and Russian के साथ collaborate करके मिला हुआ equipment that has helped India, that has assisted India, be it S-400, be it BrahMos. Alright, be it S-400, be it BrahMos. Therefore, now, when it comes to India-Russia relations, this year also major chunk of it is expected to orient towards defense procurements. It is expected to orient towards defense procurement. Other than this, what I will say is Ukraine war and India's role basically in the dynamics of Ukraine war. India obviously is not involved in Ukraine war, but dynamics of Ukraine war. Now, where do we stand? Where do we stand to gain and where do we stand to lose because of Ukraine war? That becomes important. That has to be therefore focused upon. Obviously, we cannot trade more openly with Russia because of Ukraine war, and that has limited our growth. Our growth in a trading relation which after many years had started seeing a boom. Alright, infrastructural development between India and Russia also becomes important, especially after China Vladivostok corridor and international north-south transport corridor. दोनों important है. When it comes to Russia, both these routes are important. Even if there is a general question on economic relations between India and Russia, na, add these two, they will be very important. You have to mention about them and you have to mention how these two corridors basically create a major factor based on which there will be booming of relations between India and Russia, economic relations between India and Russia. SCO BRICS, not so much. BRICS के ऊपर, I don't think BRICS के ऊपर there will be a possibility of question. Yes, one reason for that might be member countries in BRICS have been added. Member countries in BRICS have been added, but then the question will be in relation to BRICS itself, not in relation to how BRICS has been an influencing platform when it comes to India-Russia relations. Question might be on BRICS, but not on how it is an influencing factor when it comes to India-Russia relations. Alright. Moving on. India-Japan relations. India-Japan relations, now more or less, now focus of UPSC when it comes to India-Japan relations is on economic themes. How cooperation between India and Japan, what it has done is, it has led to India's infrastructural development. It has brought investments into India's IT sector. It has provided one more avenues for Indian students, especially those oriented towards engineering and sciences. Okay. From strategic point of view, of course, there is Quad. That will play a role. And questions basically are on these two arenas only, that is economic and strategic ties. Economic and strategic ties. So strategic ties, it is more or less Quad. And they go. Question is rarely upon one theme of India-Japan relations. Whenever the question has been asked, it has been asked more or less on multiple issues, because India and Japan ka even UPSC knows news mein itna kuch aata nahi. Right? So UPSC will most of the time provide you questions on which you can play. Okay? Questions on which you can substantially write. So whenever question will be asked on India-Japan relations, it will be on more than one theme, and those themes will be majorly economic and strategic. Cultural bhi ho sakta hai, but cultural mein again, there is very limited scope. So majorly it will be economic ties and strategic ties. So is pe focus karna hai. As I told you, economic ties mein it is more about tourism. It is more about India's Japan's investment, for example, in DMIC. It is also about in Japan's investment in renewable energy or collaboration between India and Japan in renewable energy. India students opting for Japan as their university destination. So all these particular aspects will be covered. Strategic mein Quad will come into play. Strategic mein obviously Quad will come into play. Investment of companies like Suzuki, I will say, or Mitsubishi, that will also come into play when it comes to economic relations. देखो bullet train है, CPEC है, Indo-Pacific, not Indo-Pakistan, Indo-Pacific alignment है, and then we have trade and cultural bottlenecks. That is why India-Japan relations have not prospered to the fullest extent. Why India-Japan relations have not prospered for fullest extent? That obviously has to be showcased. India-Israel relations. Last year it was important. Last year India-Israel relations were important, but what we saw with respect to India-Israel relations last year was question was basically not asked. So if you take into consideration India-Israel relations, there is an aspect of strategic relations, there is an aspect of defense relations between them, there is also an aspect of India's alignment with US and how it has impacted India's relations with Israel. Also, if you talk about India-Israel relations, positive aspects of the relations, MENA, you have to see to it that you add agricultural cooperation. That you basically add agricultural cooperation. ठीक है, सिर्फ weapons के बारे में नहीं लिखना है, agriculture, ठीक है, with respect to desalinization, those aspects have to be written because those are also the aspects in which India and Israel are very closely working with each other. Another aspect of India-Israel relations that can be seen from the point of view of PYQs is basically India's orientation towards the Palestinian issue. So India's orientation towards Palestinian issue has not differed. We are still oriented towards two-nation theory. We are oriented towards two-nation theory. We are still oriented towards peaceful dialogues between Israelis and Palestinians, though India has now differentiated between Palestinians' call for a nation and terrorist activities undertaken by Hamas. ठीक है, so that has to be stated. That has to be stated. Other thing, what is also important by you to be covered and to be stated is कि किस तरह India has now differentiated between its relations with Israel and its relations with other countries of West Asia. Earlier, our relations with the countries of West Asia dictated our relations with Israel. Now that is not the case. Now that basically is not the case. And of course, as Israel comes into play, from current affairs point of view, what will also come into play is I to U2. That in India, Israel, US, UAE. I to U2 will come into play, and how I to U2 will basically create more space for India in West Asia. It will create more space for India in West Asia. All right. Moving on to India-Africa relations. Africa is the classic case. Africa basically is the classic case of global South-South cooperation. ठीक है, global South-South cooperation. This year though, if you talk region-wise, what I feel is orientation is towards West Asia. Orientation is towards West Asia. Africa पे दो बार question आ चुका है. There have been questions asked on Africa. One was in 2014 and one was in 2024. ठीक है. More or less the demand of the questions was different. First was pros and cons of India's African push. To this particular question, anyone could write answer. ठीक है. India, why should India engage in Africa? And why India should not engage in Africa? India should engage in Africa because it is basically a huge market. ठीक है, Africa is basically a huge market. It has great potential. It has rising population which can provide human resources for Indian multinationals. Africa also provides India a role that it can play to showcase South-South cooperation. Africa with its 54 countries can be of great help to India when it comes to UN Security Council का permanent membership. ठीक है, why India should not invest in Africa or why India, what are the cons of India's push into Africa? First is instability in Africa, second is poverty in Africa, third is I would say extremism in Africa. ठीक है, extremism in Africa. Next is the hostile climatic conditions in Africa. Even if we make investments in Africa, we may not be able to work in Africa, or we may not be able to provide for our investments in Africa because of the hostile environment of Africa. Okay? So these basically are the reasons that we engaging in Africa might be counterproductive. Obviously, China has already made a lot of investments, so we do not know how favorable the conditions will be for India when it comes to investment in Africa. How favorable the conditions will be for India when investing in Africa. This more or less would have been the points. India's influence in Africans resurgence. India has a huge influence with respect to resurgence in Africa. ठीक है. India has played a great role when it comes to educational sectors in Africa, especially the countries of Sub-Sahara. For example, Sudan. For example, Chad. ठीक है. India has played a great role with respect to education of those particular countries. India also has played a great role when it comes to infrastructural development of the countries. For example, Ethiopia. ठीक है. For example, Ethiopia. India also has a vibrant diaspora which is entrepreneurial in nature and has created wealth for itself and the people of Africa. India also influences Africa as it is one of the countries to make largest contributions to UN peacekeeping force. So that is how India influences the resurgence of Africa. India also invests in the IT capability. India has also invested in the IT capabilities of the African. India is also known to provide health benefits to Africans through its pharmacy sector. In fact, India had played a great role through Vaccine Maitri program during the time of COVID-19 in Africa. ठीक है. More or less this would be the themes that are expected by you to know about India and Africa relations. Okay, Quad, Indo-Pacific. I would say more or less na, when it comes to Quad and Indo-Pacific, China, when we were discussing China, more or less we had focused upon it. If this year Indo-Pacific would have been much in news, I would have concentrated on this topic more, but it is not in news, so I will not suggest you to focus or invest so much of your time on Indo-Pacific or on Quad or on AUKUS. Quad, a general understanding I will want you to take with you. Okay, what is basically Quad? Quad basically is a grouping of 4 countries. And what are they oriented towards? Don't write blocking of China or containing China. Don't write this rubbish. Quad is officially oriented towards economic development and keeping the waters of Indo-Pacific democratic and navigation free. That is what Quad is. And then you have to orient towards how Quad wants to achieve it. Obviously, it wants to achieve it through better investments, better cooperation, taking climatic change into consideration, providing credit facilities, all those things. And therefore helping economic development. Okay. Don't write that we are there to block China. You can mention it as one of the points. Okay. कहीं ना कहीं उसे you can write in the answer कि भाई China is playing an hegemonic role and this hegemonic role is because of its economic muscle, and that economic muscle has to be countered to keep South China Sea, to keep Indo-Pacific free for navigation. वैसा लिख सकते हो. All right. Okay. Now come to West Asia. West Asia and security linkage, energy security linkage. Okay. What are more or less the demands of UPSC? What are more or less demands of UPSC when it comes to West Asia, when it comes to energy security? Now, first and foremost, focus upon what India is doing differently and innovatively for energy security. For energy security. Keep your reasons ready for why diversification. Why diversification of energy resources is important. Okay. What is India doing to secure its energy resources? For example, building strategic oil reserves. Okay. Read about strategic oil reserves and write about them in the comment section. I want you to basically focus upon them from the point of view of UPSC Mains this year. Okay. Energy can be one of the tools. हम लोग tools बात कर रहे थे ना. Energy basically can be one of the tools on which UPSC might ask you question. energy can be one of the tools in IR on the basis of which UPSC might ask question, and hence it is important for you to know about strategic oil reserves. Other than that, routes built by India for the purpose of securing that sources of energy. For example, India is focusing upon international north-south transport corridor. It will connect us to Central Asia, which again is the hub of energy. It will connect us to Russia, which again is the hub of energy. Other than that, also read about IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Okay, please do read about it, because it also in a way provides us energy stability. It will also provide us with energy stability. So these three questions are important. What is energy security? Why is energy security important? Of course, for economic development. Why we are opting for diversification? What innovative things are we doing for the purpose of securing our energy requirements? And last, I will say new arenas in which we are getting. So energy security, obviously non-renewable energy also has to come in. If there is a general question on energy, non-renewable energy will also come in, and then you can talk about initiatives like International Solar Alliance. Then you can take into consideration areas like International Solar Alliance. Moving on. Okay, Central Asia. Again, this year Central Asia, last year question आया था Central Asia पे, तो this year I am not expecting question on Central Asia. But if you take into consideration Central Asia, then why Central Asia is important? वो पहला question हो गया. That will be the first question I will say. Why is it important? Obviously for the purpose of energy, and second is for the purpose of overseeing the activities in Afghanistan. ऐसा directly मत लिखो, but देखो अफगानिस्तान टर्मोइल में है, right? Afghanistan has been in turmoil for a long time, and after Taliban took over, ठीक है, ऊपर से what we can see stability, but internally there are tectonic plates, I will say, shifting in the political landscape of Afghanistan. That of course will impact India. So for the purpose of having better grip over the Afghan issue, Central Asia becomes important to us. Also, Central Asia lies en route to Russia, which is the strategic partner of India. Traditionally, these countries have been friendly towards India, and therefore to maintain that status, it becomes important. It is also the area in which China is increasingly interested, and if China dominates this area beyond a particular limit, what will happen is India will lose its influence, and India cannot afford to do that. India basically cannot afford to do that. When it comes to Central Asia, infra projects. With respect to Central Asia becomes important. जो एक question Central Asia पे very predominantly was asked, that was Ashgabat Agreement, and it was with respect to how it will benefit India. So in the same way, how international north-south corridor might benefit India, that can be the orientation of UPSC. So focus upon that. Other than that, how Shanghai Cooperation Organization helps India to interact with the countries of Central Asia becomes important from the point of view of UPSC Mains. Okay. Also, एक topic है, and that is gas pipelines. देखो gas pipelines especially Tapi, which would have brought India and Central Asia even close to each other, that is an impossibility at this point of time, because of the state of relations that India is in with Pakistan. Tapi is a very old initiative. Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. Tapi basically is a very old initiative. It came into centrality when I was in college. So उसको अभी 15 साल हो गए, more than 15 years. So I do not think कि gas pipelines, it was one of the hot topics of UPSC at one point of time, gas pipelines from Central Asia, but not right now. All right. Okay, UN foreign policy, US we have done more or less. Okay. Okay, China's global posture. China's global posture. So rise of China, more or less this also we have done when we were doing India and South Asia. ठीक है, India and South Asia मैंने China भी clear किया था, but still if you more specifically look into it ना, rise of China and the way in which it has global impact. Other than that, how that global impact influences India, that has to be basically stated, that has to be basically oriented. Okay, with respect to China, one term that you can use is India and China are neither friends or enemies, so there is a term frenemies. India and China basically are frenemies. BRI, South China Sea, technopolitics. देखो BRI from the point of view of current affairs, it is always in current affairs. ठीक है, तो India and China this year, even if the question is oriented towards, now as I told you, the question first and foremost will be on de-escalation. First and foremost it will be on de-escalation. Second, it might oriented towards BRI, that is Belt and Road Initiative. How Belt and Road Initiative is creating, what it has done over the period of time is it has created favorable terms for China, but it has also created not only favorable terms for China, but it has also created debt trap diplomacy in the neighborhood of India, and how it influences India, and how China's BRI basically limits India's influence in its neighboring countries and also beyond. For example, Central Asia. If we take into consideration what is happening today in Central Asia, so half of the oil produced by Kazakhstan is bought by China. Half of the oil produced by Kazakhstan is bought by China. So just imagine the influence that China has at this point of time. And one of the reasons is China has got into Kazakhstan through BRI. Okay, it has penetrated Kazakhstan through BRI. That is the reason, na? All right. West Asia politics. In West Asia, if we talk about West Asia, the questions have oriented towards importance of West Asia from the point of view of energy, how nuclear agreement between US and Iran has influenced India. There has been also a question on IT YouTube, which according to me was one of the easiest questions in the history of UPSC Mains. All right. What UPSC expects from you when it comes to West Asia? At this point of time, taking into consideration current affairs, UPSC expects you to know about Chabar Port and how it will positively impact India. What are the obstructions with respect to Chabar Port and what is basically the way forward. Other than that, India's position on Abraham Accord. And why that particular position. Other two things, energy trade, we have already discussed upon it, and also diaspora. What is India doing to improve the conditions of India's diaspora in the West Asian region? And how that particular diaspora is basically important for us, how that particular diaspora influences India's relations with the West Asian country, All right. Okay. From Russia's point of view, how the Ukrainian war has influenced India's relations with Russia, not only Russia but also US, but here we will take into consideration Russia. बहुत important हो गया. The question has been asked twice in 20 and 23. This year also the question might come because of the drone attacks that Ukraine has carried out on Russia, and you have to basically mention how it will influence India. So it will influence India. It may make dealing with Russia more difficult for India because the war, as we see it now, the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine that were to be held in Turkey, they have broken down now. Right? They have broken down now. So the problem of India engaging with Russia might increase even more. There will of course be a question, I think, on Indus Water Treaty. I don't think on Brahmaputra there will be a question. I don't think on Brahmaputra there will be a question, because it does not arise directly from China as of now. Okay. Whenever a dispute is taken up, UPSC has a history of asking questions on dispute. No, there is nothing wrong in that. There is nothing new also in that. But that dispute has to be directly between the two countries. With respect to Brahmaputra and the statements that are made from Pakistan, so there is a dispute between India and China with respect to the usage of the water of Brahmaputra. China is building dam over Brahmaputra, which will limit India's access to the waters. Unless and until India builds a dam first and claims lower riparian rights. So there might be a question, there basically might be a question on Indus, but not on Brahmaputra, because Brahmaputra ka dispute directly has not erupted right now between India and China. If it does, then it might be in news. Otherwise, nahi. Otherwise, nahi. But looking at the way in which China is heading, it wants de-escalation with India. That is what seems. Let us wait. वैसे भी अभी मेंस को थोड़ा टाइम है. Let us see what happens in the next 15-20 days. All right. So this was about India and Russia. Take into consideration while reading India-Russia relations, I want you to also take into consideration the influence that China has had on it. तो इससे पहले UPSC has asked question on India-US relations being affected by India-Russia relations. I also want you to orient towards how India-China relations are influencing India-Russia relations. All right. Thank you so much, guys. This was all from my side. We will meet soon and continue our discussions on international relations. Thank you very much. Bye.